Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to treat these massive criminal organizations less like movie villains and more like, well, what they actually are.
Global logistical empires.
Exactly. Our mission today is a study in industrial efficiency on one hand and operational risk on the other. We're going to map the entire illicit supply chain.
From start to finish.
We're tracing a product from its dirt-cheap production cost in a South American jungle through every single high-risk border crossing and transit zone, all the way to that final retail price on an American street corner.
And that's where I come in. I'm going to be focused on the risk assessment. At every stage, we need to ask, where are the failure points? The vulnerabilities? Where does law enforcement apply pressure? And, how do these systems break down?
And we're not just speculating, we're drawing directly from the accounts of the people who lived it.
Former cartel pilots, accountants, street-level distributors, high-level transporters, they're the ones who can tell us not just how they move the product, but why their incredibly sophisticated systems eventually failed.
And I'll be your guide through the mechanics of that movement. I'm fascinated by the sheer logistical complexity, the vertical integration. How did they achieve the kind of efficiency needed to coordinate production in one country, transport it across three, and then distribute it across, what, 5 time zones?
It's a masterclass in supply chain management.
A criminal one, but a masterclass nonetheless.
It really is. I mean, the level of precision, the specialization, the capital investment, it rivals legitimate corporations. So let's unpack it. Let's start right at the foundation, the source, South America.
Okay, so when we talk about the origin of cocaine, I think most people's minds immediately jump to Colombia, Pablo Escobar, Medellin. But the source material shows us the history is a little more nuanced than that.
It is, and that nuance is critical to understanding the early logistical structure. Historically, before about 1980, Colombia wasn't the source of the raw material itself.
Right, so where was it coming from?
The coca paste, the actual raw ingredient, was coming primarily from the Andean regions, so think Bolivia and Peru. Colombian groups, especially the ones that later formed the Medellin cartel, they focused on the more specialized high-skill part of the process.
The crystallization.
Exactly, the crystallization. They were the refinery, the export hub. They took this crude, raw product from partners in other countries, like Roberto Suarez, the king of cocaine in Bolivia, processed it into the highly marketable white powder, and then, crucially, they handled the distribution out of the continent.
So Medellin wasn't the factory floor, so to speak. It was the central processing unit and the main shipping department.
A perfect analogy.
Yeah.
That shift in role gave them immense power because they controlled the high-value end of the business from the very beginning. And that's where the profitability numbers just become, well, almost unbelievable.
Staggering is the word that comes to mind. Let's talk numbers. The internal cost for the cartels to actually produce 1 kilo of crystallized cocaine in Colombia was estimated to be only around $500.
$500. Now, the wholesale price for a U.S. trafficker just going to Medellin to pick up that same kilo, it was already around $2,000.
So that's a $1,500 profit margin right there.
It's a 400% immediate markup.
Mm-hmm.
And that cushion, that $1,500, that's what funds the entire risk structure of everything that comes next. That's the capital pool you use to buy the planes, to pay the pilots, to corrupt officials, to build the entire infrastructure you need to get into the U.S. market.
It's the startup capital for an international enterprise.
Precisely.
Now, if we rewind just a little, before cocaine became the dominant product, the logistical challenges were completely different. We're talking about the early marijuana sourcing, the Reefer King era.
Oh, that era is a fascinating case study. And what happens when your logistics can't keep up with your supply?
Yeah.
It was all about sheer bulk.
So early Colombian groups, Jamaican transporters, they were just flooding Florida with marijuana.
Flooding is the right word. The supply was so excessive, so overwhelming, that it actually drove the retail price into the ground. We heard these incredible accounts of warehouses in Miami just full of unsold, rotting weed. They literally couldn't move it fast enough.
And the street price reflected that chaos. An ounce of pot, they called it a 5-finger lid, was selling for just $10.
$10. When you contrast that with the tightly controlled, high-margin cocaine market that came later, you realize this was just disorganized, high-volume chaos.
But even in that chaos, some players were trying to innovate.
Yes, and they innovated on scale and, interestingly, on quality control. Look at someone like Roger Reeves. He was determined to set himself apart not just by moving massive amounts, but by ensuring the quality of what he moved.
He didn't just place an order. He inherited a connection and then physically traveled to Santa Marta, Colombia.
To personally inspect the loads, this wasn't some remote transaction. He was hands-on, and the scale he was operating at is mind-boggling.
What kind of scale are we talking about?
He was seeking loads of 100 to 150 tons.
Tons.
Tons. That's 200 to 300,000 pounds. And his inspection process was his form of risk mitigation. He'd inspect 10 random bales, mark them, and if the quality wasn't what he expected, the supplier wouldn't get paid for months. He had all the leverage.
And the price he was paying at the source?
About $7 a pound. Incredibly low. That low acquisition cost meant the colossal risk of moving 150 tons by sea was worth it, even if the eventual wholesale price in the U.S. was also relatively low.
So the early lesson was, if you can get it cheap enough, volume can absorb the inevitable losses.
Exactly. But that all changed with the modern era. The logistics of the raw product shifted entirely, especially with the rise of synthetics.
Fentanyl, meth.
Right. Suddenly, the barrier to entry just plummeted.
Yeah.
You don't need vast detectable coca plantations or specialized farmers anymore. You don't need agricultural knowledge. You need chemistry.
And precursor chemicals, which are a lot easier to hide and move than 100 tons of marijuana.
Infinitely easier. The cartels had to pivot really fast from being these sort of agricultural organizations into becoming sophisticated chemical manufacturers.
And that pivot in production demanded a complete overhaul of their organizational structure. The source material really highlights how the Sinaloa cartel moved away from that old vertical Pablo Escobar-style pyramid.
That monolithic structure is just too vulnerable. If you take out the head, the whole body can collapse. So they evolved into something far more resilient.
A decentralized freelance system.
That's the best way to describe it. It's a network of about 20 coordinating families or clans. And what's really insightful about this structure is the specialization within it. It acts as a strategic buffer against law enforcement.
Let's break that down, because the split between the two main factions, Los Mayitos and Los Chapitos, is a perfect illustration of logistical compartmentalization.
It's brilliant from a risk management perspective. The Los Mayitos faction, aligned with El Mayo Zambada, they're the geopolitical powerhouses. They control the infrastructure.
The routes, the old poppy fields, the new fentanyl labs hidden in the mountains.
And most importantly, they hold the real military and political power outside the big cities like Culiacan. They control the source and the transit corridors. They're the wholesalers of the entire operation.
Which means Los Chapitos, El Chapo's sons, they've monopolized the retail drug market, but specifically within Culiacan.
Exactly. So think about it. If the government or a rival cartel decides to go after Los Chapitos, what are they hitting?
A retail operation, a very violent and visible one, but still just retail.
You're not hitting the production labs. You're not disrupting the international shipping routes. You've effectively insulated your high-value production and distribution assets from the high-risk, high-visibility world of street sales.
It's corporate strategy applied to crime. And the whole thing is held together by how deeply embedded they are in society.
Oh, absolutely. We heard estimates that somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 people are on the cartel payroll just in Culiacan.
That's up to an eighth of the whole city.
It's not just a criminal gang at that point. It's a major employer, a social force, a parallel government. When the airport staff, the police, the guy at the car rental agency are all on your payroll, you have perfect local intelligence. You are the law.
Which is how they can get away with issuing, official apology letters for kidnappings committed by rogue members.
It's internal governance. It's an exercise in maintaining social order so that business can continue peacefully. They're managing their own brand, in a way.
It's a level of structural sophistication built for the long haul. And that highly secure production model leads us right into the next major challenge, getting it across the border. So once the product is cooked or crystallized, the clock starts ticking. This next phase, international smuggling, is arguably where the most risk lies.
And because of that risk, it's also where the value starts to multiply like crazy.
The early high-volume operations we talked about with marijuana, they relied almost entirely on the sea. This led to the legendary saltwater cowboys.
The saltwater cowboy operations were just brute force logistics. It was all about moving insane volume into Florida. They used these massive motherships coming straight from Colombia.
And these things were carrying astonishing loads.
40, 50, sometimes up to 150 tons of marijuana.
It sounds completely insane. How did they not get caught every single time? How do you justify that kind of exposure for a relatively low-value product?
They justified it because if the operation went flawlessly, the reward was still immense. The key was in the offloading. They used these shallow draft crab boats, which are perfectly designed for the swampy, confusing, low visibility environment of the Everglades.
So the mothership would anchor offshore.
Right, under the cover of night. And the crew would just pass bale after bale down to the smaller crab boats. But this process could take hours. A single patrol boat sighting, and you lose the entire load, the boat, everything. The risk was constant.
So the operational security, even out on the open ocean, had to be really clever. What were they doing to hide these floating warehouses from the Coast Guard?
The concealment methods were often about exploiting the limits of technology at the time. Timmy McBride's accounts gave us this fascinating OPSEC trick.
What was it?
They would stack the massive pot bales high around the bow, the sides, the roof of the little crab boat. But the critical detail was stacking them just high enough so that the boat's own radar could still turn.
Ah, so on a patrol boat's radar screen.
It just looks like a normal vessel. It doesn't look like a low-lying, overloaded smuggler's boat. It mimics a regular signature.
That's brilliant. You're using the product itself as a form of camouflage. And that attention to detail, that allowed for just staggering profits from the transport alone.
It did. One crew member estimated they'd clear over $1 million in profit from a single 8,800-pound load back in 1987. And that's just the transport fee.
Which underscores why organizations like the Medellin Cartel so quickly moved toward vertical integration. They wanted to capture that transport premium themselves.
Of course. And that meant moving beyond just boats. They needed the speed and control that came with air transport. This is where pilots like Roger Reeves and Mickey Monday became so important. They built out that aviation network.
Because flying cuts down the transit time dramatically.
It cuts transit time, and it minimizes the number of touch points where law enforcement can intervene. By owning the planes and contracting the pilots, they controlled the product from the lab in Colombia all the way to the distributor in Miami. That was the key to capturing that massive price markup we talked about.
But today, the game has shifted again. Now the dominance is in land routes, especially the Sinaloa model, exploiting that huge U.S.-Mexico border.
And here the complexity changes. It's less about navigating the ocean and more about defeating intense, constant surveillance at checkpoints. It's a technological and psychological battle.
This is where we get into things like trap cars.
Yes, highly sophisticated trap cars. They'd hire specialized mechanics just to build these hidden compartments, moving loads north from staging areas like Tucson, Arizona. The mechanic became just as valuable as the chemist who made the product.
And as Frank's testimony revealed, the real operational security was about defeating the two primary detection methods: drug dogs and X-ray scanners.
They had specific countermeasures for each. For the dogs, they dipped the kilos of marijuana in liquid oil. The strong chemical smell of the oil was meant to act as a barrier, just overwhelming the dog's senses.
And for the visual inspection?
This one is so smart and so low-tech, they'd focus on the environment. They'd actually drill small holes in the trunk of the car.
Why would they do that?
To let road dust accumulate inside during the long drive from the border. Because think about it. When a Border Patrol agent opens the trunk, if the area around the seals is perfectly clean, it's a dead giveaway that it was recently packed.
But if it's covered in a fine layer of road dust?
It looks completely undisturbed, like it hasn't been opened in hundreds of miles. It's meticulous attention to the appearance of normality.
And then you have the human element. The mules. The training they received was intense psychological OPSEC.
It had to be. They were actors in the highest stakes performance of their lives. We heard they were trained from as young as 19.
And the training was very specific.
Incredibly specific. Things like spraying deodorant on your face, maybe to mask nervous sweat, maybe just a psychological anchor, wearing the right kind of sunglasses, not too dark, not too light. But the most critical part was maintaining direct eye contact with the officer and answering questions calmly. They had to project total stability.
While their heart is probably beating out of their chest.
Exactly.
Now, let's pivot for a second to how these huge international deals were actually guaranteed. You have two criminal organizations, millions of dollars in product. There's no legal recourse if a deal goes bad.
So they created their own. The Cali Cartel, with its more business-like approach, developed a system of human collateral.
This is where the guarantee man comes in.
Yes. The Cali operations would often use a neutral zone, like Panama, for the high-level deal-making. But to ensure trust, they would station a guarantee man, often a Cali Cartel sicario, a hitman in a third country, like Honduras.
And he was basically a hostage.
He was human collateral. If the person receiving the drugs failed to send the cash back to the capo in Colombia, the guarantee man was the payment. It was an institutionalized system of risk management that forced accountability where no laws existed.
And when those deals did go through, you have the reverse problem, getting all that cash back south.
It's the physical burden of wealth, the logistics of cash, and the cartels had a strong preference.
$100 bills.
Overwhelmingly. Why? $1 million in hundreds is a relatively small, manageable package. $1 million in 20s, that's a huge, heavy duffel bag.
Which is much harder to hide.
It exponentially increases the risk of interception. The choice of currency is a fundamental logistical decision.
And beyond just trap cars and cash, we heard about even more sophisticated methods for international freight. Things that bypass these direct cash-for-product risks.
Oh yeah, this is next-level stuff. High-tech concealment for high-value cocaine, often using legitimate commercial channels.
Like Owen Hansen's methods.
Right. One method was dissolving cocaine into the liquid of Napa Valley wine bottles to ship to Australia. You need complex chemistry on both ends to dissolve it and then reconstitute it.
And the other one involved chocolate bars.
Expired chocolate bars, specifically. They'd take them, hollow them out, stuff the cocaine bricks inside, then reseal them and put them on a massive commercial pallet with thousands of legitimate products.
So you're hiding in plain sight.
You're blending in. You're using the sheer volume of global commerce as your cover. The risk is astronomical if you get caught, but the probability of a random inspection on a pallet of chocolate is dramatically lower than a suspicious car at a border checkpoint. It's a different kind of risk calculation.
Okay, so once that product, whether it's in a wine bottle or a trap car, makes it across the border, that's where the real reward is realized. The price just explodes.
This is where the risk is monetized. And that increase in value, it's driven purely by the distance from the source and the successful navigation of all those risks we just talked about. It's fascinating to track the economic geography of it.
Let's map it out then. We said cocaine costs the cartel maybe $2,000 a kilo wholesale in Colombia. What happens when it hits a major U.S. distribution hub like Los Angeles or New York?
The price jumps to as much as $35,000 a kilo.
So that's a $33,000 difference.
That's the price of successful transit and border penetration. But the market keeps rewarding risk the further you go. If you can get that same kilo to Europe, say Madrid, the price shoots up again.
To what?
To an astonishing $60,000 to $70,000 per kilo.
Wow. So the logistical challenge of crossing the Atlantic, dealing with a whole different set of customs and law enforcement agencies, it nearly doubles the price again.
Exactly. It's confirmation that the logistical capacity to reach these high-demand, hard-to-access markets is the ultimate driver of profitability. The organizations that built reliable routes into Europe were the richest.
And we see the same strategy, just with smaller margins, in the marijuana trade. A pound of pot bought for, say, $4.30 in Tucson might cost $5.30 a pound total by the time you factor in transport to get it to Ohio.
Right, and the wholesale price to distributors there might only be $800 or $900 a pound. That's a low markup, maybe 50%.
So how is that profitable?
Volume. Sheer massive volume. The runners are moving 400 pounds per truck, doing 3 runs a week. That focus on high volume and lower margins creates a steady, massive cash flow and allows them to dominate a market quickly.
And to move that kind of volume, they had to rely on these major domestic distribution corridors. The I-35 route, coming up from the Laredo border crossing, seems paramount.
I-35 is the central artery of the whole system. Product flows north through Texas, San Antonio, Houston up to Dallas, and then branches out, often heading for huge hubs like Chicago. Moving bulk on those routes requires industrial-level camouflage.
And they often used industrial logistics to do it. We heard accounts of using flatbed trucks carrying heavy construction equipment. Why was that so effective?
Because law enforcement is generally trained to look for the suspicious minivan or the unmarked cargo van. A legitimate-looking flatbed truck with a bulldozer on the back, that's inherently low scrutiny.
It's just part of the normal flow of commerce.
And the concealment is engineered into the load itself. You often need specialized tools and labor just to get to the hidden compartments. It's about blending in completely.
But the single biggest innovation in domestic logistics, according to our sources, wasn't a truck or a plane at all.
No, it was the U.S. Postal Service.
And FedEx and UPS. The claim we heard is that these mail carriers have shipped more drugs than Pablo Escobar and El Chapo combined.
And it's a compelling argument when you think about efficiency and scale. Why would you invest millions in your own planes and pilots when you can leverage this existing, incredibly fast, reliable, and relatively low-scrutiny national infrastructure.
So traffickers adopted a different kind of shipping strategy.
Low-risk, high-frequency strategy. Instead of one huge load, you ship many small ones, typically 5 to 10 pounds per box, sent to different addresses. This ensures that no single interception results in a major federal case.
Someone like Eric Norrie, he might move 3 packages a week.
Right, totaling maybe 15 to 25 pounds weekly. Now, do the math on that. At a profit of $1,000 a pound, that's $1 million a year business with almost no operational overhead and zero risk of violence.
It's clean, it's efficient.
And they developed specific OPSEC for it. Norrie talked about lining boxes with carbon paper, which he believed was effective at defeating some of the older X-ray tech. But here's the most fascinating part of the risk assessment for me.
What's that?
Dealers could actually lose up to 80% of their packages to interception and still turn a significant profit.
80%.
They just viewed it as a cost of doing business, an acceptable operational loss, not a catastrophic failure. They baked loss tolerance right into the model.
But the system wasn't foolproof. There were specific vulnerabilities, particularly with one carrier.
UPS was considered the riskiest carrier.
Why?
Because nearly everything goes through their massive Worldport sorting facility in Louisville, Kentucky. And that hub was notorious for two things: endemic employee theft and a huge law enforcement presence, because they knew it was a bottleneck. Packages were constantly being flagged by drug-sniffing dogs there.
So the feds adapted. If they couldn't always catch the product coming in, they started focusing on the cash going back out.
And that became a major vulnerability. The DEA developed tactics like the 10.05 AM rule for what they called dead packages.
What does that mean?
The package would get flagged as suspicious, but instead of seizing it immediately, they'd let it continue on its journey while tracking it to see who was checking the tracking number, who was waiting for it. But more critically, they just started targeting the cash flow. They successfully intercepted shipments of $3 to $5 million in cash, even when they never found the incoming drugs.
So targeting the money is sometimes cleaner.
It's often a more definitive way to dismantle the organization.
Now, this whole domestic network needs a final transition point before it hits the street. In New York City, that point was Washington Heights.
Washington Heights became this crucial enclave for newly arrived Dominican immigrants, and it served as the essential funnel. It was a primary distribution point for cartel product, both weed and coke, coming from Colombia and Mexico.
It was the gateway to the retail level.
Exactly. It's where the high-volume wholesale kilos were broken down and moved to the street-level organizations.
And the social dynamics of the time really dictated the supply chain structure. We heard that the Colombian cartels often preferred to deal with the Dominican connections there.
Yeah, over the existing black crack dealers in Harlem. And that decision, whether it was based on cultural affinity or existing trust networks or whatever, it was a strategic one. It created this very specific, very efficient pipeline that allowed certain kingpins like Unique to get their hands on wholesale powder and build an empire.
And that brings us to the final mile. Once that wholesale powder cocaine hit a hub like Washington Heights, it was ready for its final transformation. And this is where the markup becomes absolutely insane. The story of Unique in Harlem really illustrates how a kingpin could master these last-mile logistics.
He was a true operator at the micro level. He understood his market inside and out. He's buying powder cocaine wholesale from his Dominican connections, often paying around $15,000 a kilo when the going rate on the street was closer to $22,000.
So he had a $7,000 margin right from the start.
That initial negotiation, that margin, was the entire foundation of his retail profitability. But the real key to his dominance, his secret sauce, was quality control. He didn't just sell what he bought.
He took over the manufacturing process himself.
Exactly. Distributors like him would buy the pure powder specifically so they could cook it themselves into crack cocaine. This way, they controlled the potency, the size of the vials, the whole customer experience.
And quality was everything.
It was more important than price. The goal wasn't to be the cheapest, it was to be the best. As one source put it, a user who usually has $75 to get high will find the extra $25 if it means getting a guaranteed superior product.
And these retail operations, these spots, they were generating just immense high-velocity cash flow. We're talking about selling $10 vials of crack.
Tiny purchases. But the volume was so high that a sophisticated spot could bring in $10,000 to $20,000 a day.
A day? That's millions of dollars a year from a single street corner.
It rivals the revenue of many legitimate small businesses. It just shows you the power of controlling that final touch point with the consumer.
And what's truly remarkable to me, what connects this whole illicit operation back to basic business strategy, is the focus on customer service.
The anecdotes are just priceless. There was the account of this dealer who would keep a bag of $1 bills on hand,
Why?
specifically to cover a customer who was $1 short on a $10 purchase.
You're kidding.
That is classic customer retention. You treat the customer well, you ensure their satisfaction, you build loyalty. That means they come back to your spot tomorrow, not the guy down the street who's maybe $1 cheaper but has worse product.
The entire network, from a jungle lab to a Harlem street corner, is built on maximizing margin and ensuring customer satisfaction. It's unbelievable.
And that final price disparity, if we trace it all the way back to the source, is just shocking. We heard that in Medellin you could buy cocaine for as little as $1.50 a gram.
$1.50.
10 pesos. We heard this specific story of a tourist who was selling in Medellin hostels. He'd buy a brick at $2 a gram and then flip it to wealthy European travelers for $18 a gram.
He's making $16 a gram.
He could net $15,000 in profit from one single brick. Now, put that in perspective. From $1.50 in Medellin to a $10 retail vial in Harlem, the value has multiplied by thousands of percent. That final jump is the true measure of all the transport risk, the processing cost, and the retail scarcity in a high-demand city.
And for contrast, an ounce of powder coke in Harlem at the same time was going for $400 or $500.
Which shows how quickly the market absorbs that risk premium. But the trafficking doesn't even stop there. The supply chain has one final, ultimate destination.
The prison system.
Prison economics, the most restricted market on Earth.
And the markup inside is extreme because the risk of getting it in is so enormous. Heroin, crystal meth, those are the key products.
And the methods for getting them in are just brilliantly low-tech. Family members smuggling drugs, usually sealed in a tiny balloon, through the visiting room.
How do they make the handoff without the guards seeing?
It's a simple trick. They'll buy a bag of chips from the vending machine in the visiting room. And in the moment of passing the chips, using the bag as cover, they make the tiny balloon transfer.
It's exploiting a momentary blind spot in surveillance.
A tiny blind spot. But that massive risk translates directly into astronomical prices.
Give me an example.
A prison gram of black tar heroin, which was described as being the size of an M&M peanut, costs $600.
$600.
And a single small line of meth costs $20, which is the street price for an entire gram of meth. The value of contraband inside a prison where the supply chain is almost non-existent is the ultimate monetization of logistical difficulty.
Okay, so we've mapped the flow of the product and the flow of the money. Now we have to look at the flip side. The risk, the failure, the vulnerabilities. These organizations had to develop incredibly sophisticated counter-surveillance tactics just to survive.
Survival OPSEC, and a lot of it, especially on the highways, was about exploiting human psychology and predictability.
Like what?
Like driving in bad weather. Traffickers love thunderstorms and heavy rain.
Why?
Because cops are human. They're less likely to want to get out of their car in a downpour to conduct a traffic stop. You're exploiting that moment of human laziness or comfort seeking.
It's simple, but probably very effective. They also use their own security layers, like convoy tactics.
Yes, the use of front and back spotter cars was common. It created this mobile security bubble around the load car. And the front spotter's job was incredibly dangerous.
Their job was essentially to get caught.
If they saw a trooper, their job was to do something to attract the traffic stop, to pull the police away from the main car that was carrying hundreds of pounds of product. They were a sacrificial lamb to save the load.
And then you have these moments of brilliant, on-the-fly psychological warfare. The story George Gleckler told about the Marine sticker is a perfect example of improvisational OPSEC.
It's a moment of genius under extreme pressure. He has 30 pounds in a trap car, he gets pulled over, he's put a Marine Corps sticker on the back of the car.
And he tells the cop he's on his way to enlist.
And the cop, who's probably ex-military himself, just completely softens, lets him go with a drive safe soldier.
Incredible.
It shows that for all the technology and all the trap cars, the whole game still relies on reading people. The human element is always the ultimate vulnerability on both sides.
And when those external methods fail, the organizations have to rely on their own internal enforcement, the violence.
But it's not always arbitrary violence. The role of the Cali Cartel hitman, for example, it was structural. He wasn't just a killer. He was the guarantee man, the enforcer of contracts.
And the Sinaloa structure, which acts like a parallel government, it even regulates its own violence.
Right? They issue apology letters for kidnappings done by rogue wings of their own organization. That's not benevolence. That is internal governance. It's an attempt to maintain order and avoid attracting unnecessary heat from the federales or the military. They want to regulate the violence to protect the supply chain.
And their operational success on the ground relies so heavily on human surveillance, the Halcones and the Punteros.
We have to be clear what these are. Halcones hawks, Punteros lookouts.
Yeah.
These are just local people, paid a retainer to be the eyes and ears of the organization,
Stationed in bus stations, at intersections.
feeding real-time intelligence back to the operational groups about law enforcement movements, about potential targets. This constant flow of ground-level intel is what makes border penetration possible.
But at the end of the day, most of these empires don't end in a big shootout. They fail because of systemic vulnerabilities that federal agencies are designed to exploit.
And the single biggest threat, always, is the informant, the inside man. Most of the high-level arrests, the huge sentences, they come from information provided by collaborators.
And the law magnifies that exposure. We have to talk about why RICO charges are the real nail in the coffin.
RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, is what allows the government to charge you not just for the kilo you were caught with, but for the entire criminal enterprise you were a part of.
Conspiracy is the charge that ties everyone together.
Exactly. We heard the account of one individual who was sentenced for 580 kilos. But law enforcement never actually seized any product from him directly.
It was all based on ledgers and testimony.
The conspiracy charge means you are liable for the full scale of the operation, and that's what leads to these massive mandatory minimum sentences of 20, 30 years.
And the DEA is incredibly effective at leveraging that. They offer deals.
Always trading up. Give us your supplier and we'll cut you a break. Give us a cartel member and you might walk free.
And as we mentioned, the feds also learned to target the cash flow.
Targeting the profits was sometimes a cleaner way to dismantle the financial structure. Money laundering leaves a paper trail, or at least a digital one.
Meanwhile, on the other side, defense lawyers have had to become tech experts to fight back. We heard about them fighting the use of things like stingray devices.
These are devices that can trace cell phone locations, even inside prisons. And this brings up a huge legal battle over what's called evidentiary privilege.
The police don't want to reveal how their surveillance tech works.
They argue it compromises future operations or national security.
Mm-hmm.
The defense argues that if they don't know how the evidence was collected, they can't properly challenge it. It's this constant, hidden technological arms race happening in courtrooms.
So this all brings us to the core debate of this whole deep dive. Does all this increasing sophistication, the trap cars, the mail systems, the chemical synthesis, does it actually lead to better survival odds?
Or does it just attract a bigger federal hammer?
And what do the sources suggest?
I think they provide a pretty compelling, if tragic, answer. The sophistication dramatically expands your profit potential, but it primarily attracts exponentially larger federal cases. When you move from street dealing to multi-state mail distribution, you're not facing a state drug charge anymore.
You're risking IACO, conspiracy indictments, plea offers of 34 years.
Compare the high-tech, multi-million-dollar smuggling runs with the low-tech, high-volume retail spots in Washington Heights. Those spots were also generating millions a year.
But they relied on simple cooking, quality control, and customer relations.
They stayed local, and that's inherently a lower profile, until, of course, they become centers of violence, which is their own unique failure point. The trade-off is crystal clear. Higher complexity might lower the odds of a small bust, but it dramatically increases the severity of the sentence when you inevitably get caught. It's the difference between risking 5 years in state prison and facing life under a RICO conviction.
So we've completed the full journey. We've mapped it all out. From the Andean coca paste being crystallized in Medellin for maybe $2,000 a kilo, through these incredibly ingenious and high-risk transit routes.
The price exploding to $35,000 in U.S. hubs.
All the way to this sophisticated, high-volume retail operation selling a $10 bottle of crack in Harlem, sustained by, of all things, rigorous customer service.
And what really stands out to me is the incredible precision and specialization required at every single stage. This is a supply chain that demands vertical integration, specialized labor.
You have chemists, mechanics, pilots, currency
And
transporters.
constant, ruthless risk assessment. The whole architecture perfectly mimics a legitimate multinational corporation. They use decentralization, quality control, and they are masters of maximizing the arbitrage between the source cost and the market demand.
And that operational architecture, that logistical brilliance, that's really the key takeaway for you, our listener. Because even as things like marijuana legalization continue, and as we see the rise of synthetics like fentanyl, the logistical empires we've documented today are not going to just disappear.
They've already proven they can adapt. They will pivot.
Yeah.
Given the diversification we already see in cartel operations,
Mhm.
into fentanyl synthesis, massive-scale human smuggling, localized extortion, the organizational infrastructure and logistical genius that built these drug routes will just be applied to the next high-risk
Or
endeavor.
whatever that may be.
The supply chain proved it could survive prohibition. It will survive legalization by adapting its operational genius to new forms of illicit profit. And that is the lasting legacy of the Connect, from source to street.